Hey everybody, this is Sean Moran, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Frazer Rice. He's the author of a book called Wealth Actually. His website is wealthactually.com, and we have the pleasure to have a conversation and a dialogue with him around his book, how he got started in entrepreneurship. Just do a quick introduction.
And we're great salespeople as children.
Just always been very competitive.
It was really birthed out of my own real world experiences.
Hey everybody, and welcome to this week's episode. And so with that, we'll welcome Frazer today. How are you?
Sean, thanks for having me on. I'm terrific. I'm a little sweaty. I just went for a run, so I apologize to your audience already.
Hey, that's okay. You know, it's all the human aspect of it. So I guess tell us a little bit about your book and kind of where you started, how you got to the book, and what that might be, and just give a little background about yourself.
Sure. So this is really my fourth career in many ways. So I graduated from college and I went into politics. I worked in Albany for approximately a little over 2 years. I worked for Governor Pataki. I was at the Department of Economic Development, and politics in many ways is my first love. I got into that, had a good experience there, but I didn't want to be a civil servant my whole life. So I did what most lost souls do, and I went to law school. So I went down to Emory down in Atlanta, and I had a variety of really good experiences there. I got to my third year in law school, and I was working for the Fed. Nice people, and Atlanta was a great spot, and interesting type of legal work. But I said, if this is as good as practicing law gets, it's probably not good enough for me. So I kind of mentally flipped the switch there and said I wanted to do something else. I graduated from law school and passed the bar. I practiced for a couple of years. In the meantime, I'd been writing and doing some other media types of things on the side, which is something I'd always liked to do. I met a fellow by the name of Tony Guernsey and got involved with private banking, and which sort of took care of the banking law interest. It got me away from the billable hour, which wasn't going to be a friendly fit for me. And it got me around people, which I liked a lot. I didn't want to be locked in a library. So I spent 16 years there at Wilmington Trust. I spent probably the first 4 to 5 years helping a managing director manage a pretty large book of business. She went on to other places, and most of the book of business stayed with me. And then I was on my own ever since. And basically what happened is I took care of the clients and went out and found new ones. So fast forward to August of this year. Well, I'll go back a little bit further. In the meantime, I'd been writing a lot. I write screenplays and graphic novels as a hobby, and blogs and a variety of other things. And I got started with a podcast about 2 years ago, which really activated the left side of my brain. And I really wanted to do more with it. And starting in 2017, I took the plunge. I found the folks at Lioncrest Publishing to get started writing a book about a lot of things that I thought made sense that I'd seen in my professional life to help wealthy people and beyond. And I started writing the book. And that was essentially done in about at the end of 2017. And for a variety of logistical reasons, which I guess we'll get into in a few minutes, I waited until August to launch the book. And it's been a thrill ride ever since.
Well, that's awesome. I actually kind of say there's some parallels there. My background's corporate tax. I spent 15 years in that. 2013, I wrote a book as well, and haven't really turned that into a business yet. But, that's part of the reason for the podcast, is to kind of share some of the ideas I shared in my book. And obviously our books are definitely different, and would love to hear a little bit more about, the logistical side of that and where that brings you to at this point.
Yeah, so the logistics were important to me. And one area where Lioncrest was really helpful was the fact that I had pretty much total control of my timeline. And again, writing a book for the first time, there are a lot of unknowns, and you're trying to, kind of wondering whether it's going to suck or if it's going to be good, or there's a lot of self-doubt in there. And I had my own process where I'd send drafts out to people that I trusted, and it would come back. And I started to really get some faith in it about halfway through 2017, and said, I think I've got something I can be really proud of. And at the end of 2017, I kind of looked at the entrepreneurial side of things and said, I'm not going to be able to publish the book while employed at Wilmington Trust. From a compliance perspective, from a branding perspective, it was just going to be too tough to educate them to think that it would benefit them. And And so I said, okay, so this is going to be on my own. I'm probably going to have to do it not employed there. What am I going to do to set myself up so that I had some wiggle room financially to be able to give this a real go, and to turn parts of this into a little bit of a business and give myself options going forward? I had thought, from 16 years at a bank, you can either be moving up the management ladder, or, they could be very happy having you in one particular function. And I think I sort of fell on the latter. I was in, I would say, brand and job description jail. And the book was in some ways a good way for me to break out of that. So logistics wise, from the beginning of 2017 until about August of 2018, end of 2017 to the beginning, or August of 2018, I basically just sort of ramped up internally what I wanted to do. I started saving as much money as I possibly could to give myself 6 to 9 months to a year of expenses and living expenses in order to, sort of go out, promote the book, do some things, try to build some other ancillary sources of income, and get started on that. And so my calculus was basically try to fit the right way so that I could resign quite amicably with Wilmington Trust, which is what I did, and move on to the things that I wanted to do going forward.
Well, that's great. I definitely like when you were saying about the saving up, and that's kind of, synchronous to me, because, within one of the things that I tell people both on the entrepreneurial side is you need to be prepared that money isn't going to be flowing necessarily right away. So make sure that you have the finances to see it through. Otherwise, you may have the greatest thing, might have the greatest book, widget, whatever it is, but if you can't carry that through, during the lean times, you'll end up in a situation where you have to go back to, what you were doing before. So, I see, like, from the book, it says wealth actually intelligent decision making for the 1%. So it sounds like an interesting niche. So the 1%, is that kind of like the quote unquote 1% that we hear, kind of the wealthiest 1% in the country? And talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the 1% is what I know. My job at Wilmington was to take care of wealthy clients, sort of diagnose their needs, and try to figure out solutions for them, hopefully with, sort of Wilmington Trust capabilities. But there are a lot of parallels to what happens in the 1% and with the quote unquote rest of us. And part of, I'd say the book is somewhat unfortunately titled, in the sense that I wrote about what I knew, and it's sort of an interesting niche, but a lot of people have commented to me that, geez, I'm not in the 1%. Is there anything I can get out of the book? And my answer is yes, absolutely. I think there are a lot of concepts that resonate that would be very helpful. Among them are, I sort of go through a whole litany of things as to sort of diagnosing how much that you cost. And many times one of the real threats to somebody's financial situation is when they overspend, or when they get over their skis a little bit as it relates to financial commitments that they take on. Another form of another threat to wealth is lack of communication within the family. I can count on, both hands, both feet, and probably a few other appendages, the number of families that have had real destruction in their wealth because there's been infighting. And many times that's been from a lack of communication from the get-go as to what the really what the plan of the family is, what the values were meant to be transferred to the next generation, not just monetarily, but, if there's a sense of entrepreneurism or philanthropy, or, if some people have abilities and others don't, they got a culture where they take care of their own, that type of thing. And when you don't have that transferred, many times you're sowing the seeds of discord going forward. And unfortunately, conflict is expensive.
Mm-hmm. So that's definitely interesting. So I think the funny thing is that everybody wants to be the 1%. So are there things either in that, or what would you share with the average person, like you say, the rest of us, like us, that want to get there, or want to get to the top, or at least to the next level in our financial security? What would you kind of say are some of the things that the 1% do successfully that we can implement in our lives, and make that make our lives so much more financially secure?
Sure. So I mentioned before, really having a handle on your spending and understanding what you have and what you have from a income generating capability and what could cause problems for that. You know, for instance, if you're an investment banker and you're used to making $2 million a year, but then you're laid off, you know, how do you replace that if there isn't another investment banking job around the corner? By the same token, if you're a first round draft choice and you were going from, you know, sort of a college lifestyle and now all of a sudden you're buying Lamborghinis and boats, for a career that, you know, many times doesn't last much longer than a few years, if at all. You know, those are the types of pitfalls that I think are scary. I think the other major thing that wealthy people have a real good handle on is the power of compounding. And best illustrated by saying, okay, if I've got a certain long bandwidth of time and I'm able to earn interest over that time, you can get geometric returns on that front. If you save. By the same token, if you put that in reverse and you borrow and you don't pay off your debt, you could end up with a big liability going forward that's more difficult to service later on, especially dangerous as you're near retirement and you're trying to save as much and generate as many assets as you can that you can live off of when you're not working or able to work going forward.
Excellent. So I know I'm looking at your website and it says, with the right knowledge, planning, and guidance, you can preserve your assets and enjoy them. So what are some ways that or techniques that you suggest to the average person to help plan and basically preserve their assets? You know, is that necessarily for just the wealthy, or what would you suggest to the average person or to the 1% that is watching? What's the best way to, essentially preserve your assets?
Well, one of the best things you can do, I think, is make sure you think about saving for retirement longer term. Once you retire, there's no way to really refill the bucket. You know, when you're done working, and there's very little way to come back from that unless you win the lottery or something like that. And winning the lottery is not a plan. And so, one of the simple things I would say for those in the non 1%, but even the 1% too, is to make sure that you have your post-working days funded to the extent you can. That can be, making sure you max out on your 401k and using that in conjunction with the power of compounding, letting time work for you. If you can save a lot early, it's going to make your retirement situation a lot easier later on. You will have built up the assets to live off of when the time comes when you don't have it. I would also say, I think there are thinking about the different goals in your life that you want to save for is a good idea. Whether it's buying a house, paying off your student loan debt, as you move up in assets, paying for educations, paying for weddings, paying for kids' houses, paying for your own sort of fun retirement needs and so on. And then as you go further up the ladder, paying for the legacy when you're no longer here, whether you're, giving money away to your kids or giving money away to the philanthropies you care about, or your other causes. That's the type of thing that I think that thinking about that and sort of sequestering pools of money and saving for it is a good way to make sure that you do it, as opposed to just sort of hoping and assuming that there'll be a pot of money there. If you sort of sequester your goals and sequester your savings around the goals, it's more likely that they'll happen.
Well, I think that's really powerful. I think that's probably one of the things that most people don't do, right? Is kind of set up, as you're saying, like kind of create buckets of funds and say, hey, I want to do this with this amount of money and this with this amount of money. Obviously, if you're wealthy, it's much easier to do than the average person. But, I know for myself, I can easily, the first thing I wanted to tackle was 401k, put as much as I can and keep increasing that. But then other things, like you said, like philanthropy. Obviously, people that are wealthy definitely find, things that they want to do. And to me, that's important too. So I love that you're talking about that. What are some of the things that, when you're saying you're building a business around the book, what are some of the specific things that you're looking to do? And, what kind of clients or what kind of people would you be interested in working with? So that if somebody's watching this, they say, hey, I want to talk to Frazer because I think you can add value for me. Who are those people?
Sure. So, so when I left Wilmington Trust, there are a few clients that sort of keep me around in the sense that they want me to help around qualitative or fiduciary issues. How do I think about trusts, or how do I think about my kids? And so I do a little bit of work around that. I work with a lot of different advisors now, trying to get them to think intergenerationally. And I think many times in the investment management business, people are very focused on the client, and rightfully so. The big glaring statistic is that, and I forget the exact number, but I think it's 85% of kids replace the financial advisor that their parents had. And so there are a lot of advisors around out there who look at that statistic, especially people with big books of business, and say, how do I avoid that? And I think there are a lot of different tacks you can take on that front, as far as trying to get involved with the next generation in the family as early as possible, and being part of the advice component around the team, so that as families get up in wealth and that they're starting to make decisions about things, they're coming to you, and you're able to provide some guidance around the problems that we talked about before.
Okay. And as far as the book, obviously it sounds like that's what we're talking about more specifically. But is there another avenue in which you're looking to grow your business here, as far as the website? Obviously I'm seeing the book. What other things are kind of the focus of your business, Wealth Actually?
Sure. So there's a podcast, which I've done for about 2 years, which I've recently rebranded the Wealth Actually podcast. And so I'm having discussions with people in the industry about various topics, whether it relates to investing, or trust and estates issues, or family governance issues, or other threats to wealth. It even varies to things like cybersecurity and other types of scenarios. So there's potential revenue streams there. I'm hoping to be doing a little bit more public speaking around the book and around the podcast, and I've already got a couple of situations lined up, which is good. And then I'm also doing a lot of sort of moderating and sort of brand spokesmanship within the investment management industry. So I know I'm trying to get a bunch of little revenue streams flowing into the Wealth Actually LLC, as it were, and build that up from there. And sort of the broader component for me is to go from being a cog in the industry to being more of a voice in the industry. And I think that pivot is important for me, so that even if I re-engage the industry in 6 months or a year in a more technical sense, I'm bringing a much different skill set than I had before, which was strictly client relationship management and business development. Those skills don't really go away, and I think raising my profile and having a bit more of a voice in the industry sort of enhances those, but it also creates a little bit more of a pivot, so that I can be the driver from a marketing standpoint going forward, if I decide to choose that. And if the Wealth Actually component is more of an ancillary source of revenue for me. Right.
Where else could people find the book, or how's best to get in touch with you if they want to continue the dialogue?
Sure. So again, I'm available for sort of personal consultations. I don't sell investments, so I am really more to sort of help you think about things, and that's what the book is for as well. You can find me at wealthactually.com. You can find me at frazerrice.com. I have my personal website, and that's where my podcast hovers. I'm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all the other major platforms. And the book is on Amazon, and that's its main vessel right now.
Okay, perfect. And I will also get all that information from you, and I will include that in the show notes on the podcast, as well as put in the description for the YouTube channels. Anything else you'd like to close with? Anything else you'd like to share? It's definitely been insightful, and greatly appreciate it.
Sure. The biggest thing I'd like to share is that if you're an entrepreneur and you're thinking about it, and you're working in a situation, my only regret, and I really don't have any regrets, the only thing I wish I had happen is that I'd done it earlier. I'm mid 40s right now, and this would be twice as much fun at age 35 as 45, and it's a lot of fun right now. I encourage anybody who's able to take the leap. Think about it, be cautious about it. Look at the risks, look at the things that you need to worry about. Family expenses and et cetera. But if you can take the leap, it's been well worth it for me.
Excellent. No, and I say the same. So I definitely appreciate that. And I think, like you said, I like that you were saying you prepared for it. You made sure that you're financially prepared to be able to make that step. But going out and getting it done is huge. So, thanks so much for taking the time. Again, I encourage people to take a look at your website, your book, and get in touch if there's something that you can do to help them. And thank you so much for taking the time with us.
Thanks for having with me here, Sean. It was a lot of fun.